Slap. That sound was like a slap she couldn't stop thinking about. Marina Johnson carried in her blue eyes the same sadness of someone who had lost herself among the sewing machines and the silences of a home that wasn't really home. Her hands trembled as she held the fabrics, not from the cold of Miami, but from the emptiness that grew inside her chest each morning when she woke up. The smell of machine oil mixed with the cheap perfume she wore to disguise the lack of hope, when her fingers stained with thread accidentally touched those of a stranger who watched her from afar. Robert Johnson wasn't just the factory owner, he was the man who would make her remember that she still had a heart beating beneath so much hidden pain. Sweat dripped down Marina Johnson's forehead as she adjusted the industrial machine needle once more. The deafening noise of the Johnson & Sons textiles warehouse, one of the largest sewing machine manufacturers in the United States, echoed like a metallic symphony that had long stopped bothering her ears. At 20 years old, Marina already carried on her shoulders the weight of someone who had to mature too quickly. Her brown hair was tied in a simple bun, revealing fair skin that contrasted with her soft blue eyes, almost grayish, that seemed to hold stories she would never tell. It was a discreet beauty, the kind that goes unnoticed in the rush of daily life, but when noticed, leaves a lasting impression. That Tuesday morning, the heat of Miami seemed even more suffocating inside the industrial warehouse in Coral Gables. Marina worked concentrated, trying to ignore the wrist pain that had been intensifying in recent weeks. She needed to meet the daily quota. Her survival depended on it. It was when she bent down to pick up a fabric roll that had slipped under the table that her blouse sleeve involuntarily rode up. The marks were there, purplish and recent, with the clear shape of fingers that had closed forcefully around her arm. Marina quickly pulled the sleeve down, but wasn't fast enough. From the other side of the warehouse, standing near the office entrance, Robert Johnson observed everything with an expression that mixed surprise and something he couldn't define. At 33 years old, the heir to the Johnson & Sons empire rarely visited the factory floor. He preferred the air-conditioned offices, meetings with investors, and business trips that kept him away from the harsh reality of those who sustained his fortune. Tall at 6'1", Robert had the elegant posture of someone born into wealth. His dark brown hair was always impeccably styled, and his intense blue eyes usually intimidated even the most experienced executives. He wore an Italian suit that cost more than Marina earned in 6 months, but at that moment all his wealth seemed insignificant before the scene he had just witnessed. He had come down to the warehouse on impulse, escaping from another boring meeting about market expansion. He wanted to see with his own eyes what really happened in the company he had inherited from his father. He hadn't expected to find that. The silent beauty of a young employee and the marks of violence stamped on her skin. Marina returned to work, not realizing she was being watched. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical, as if she had learned to become invisible. Each stitch she sewed was one more day of survival. Each finished piece represented the hope that maybe one day she could have a different life. What Robert didn't know was that Marina carried a much greater pain than the marks on her arm. 3 years earlier, her mother, Grace Johnson, had died right there, in that warehouse, victim of an accident that could have been prevented. Since then, Marina lived with her uncle Edward, a bitter and violent man who saw her as just another source of income and frustration. Edward Miller, at 45 years old, was supervisor of one of the production lines and used his position to intimidate those below him in the hierarchy. For him, Marina was nothing more than a burden he had inherited from his sister. The young woman worked during the day and handed over her entire salary to her uncle at night, keeping only enough for the bus and a snack during break. At lunchtime, while most employees headed to the cafeteria, Marina remained at her station, eating a ham sandwich she had brought from home. It was in this moment of relative silence that she allowed herself to dream. She looked through the warehouse's fogged windows and imagined what it would be like to have a normal life, to have her own home, maybe study fashion design like she always wanted. Robert returned to the office but couldn't concentrate on work. The image of that young woman remained in his mind, not just her beauty, but the dignity with which she worked, even carrying marks of violence. There was something about her that had touched him deeply, something that his many superficial relationships had never managed. To awaken. That night, Marina arrived home to find Edward drinking beer on the couch, watching football. The two-bedroom apartment in Key Biscayne was small and poorly lit, always smelling of cigarettes and reheated food. "You're late today," Edward grumbled without taking his eyes off the television. "Had to work overtime," Marina replied quietly, handing over the money she had received for the day's work. "Good. We need all the money we can get." He counted the bills with greasy fingers. "And don't forget rent is due next week." Marina nodded silently and headed to her small room. The peeling walls were decorated only with a photo of her mother and some clothing sketches she made in her spare time. She sat on the narrow bed and massaged her injured arm, trying to relieve the physical pain that seemed smaller compared to the pain in her chest. She didn't know that, on the other side of the city, in a luxurious penthouse in South Beach, Robert Johnson also couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, something had touched his heart in a way that money and power had never been able to buy. The next day, Robert made a decision that would change everything. He would return to the warehouse, officially to closely monitor the production process. In reality, to try to understand who was that woman who worked with such dignity amidst the chaos. Marina arrived at work as always, punctual and silent. She didn't notice Robert's looks, who observed from a distance, trying to understand why he felt so attracted to someone who, theoretically, lived in a completely different world from his. It was the beginning of a story that would test the limits of love, courage, and the capacity for transformation of two people who, unknowingly, were about to change each other's lives forever. The sewing machine continued its hypnotic rhythm, as if it knew it was sewing not just fabrics, but the destiny of two souls who would soon meet. And you, have you ever had the feeling that someone was watching you from afar? Sometimes love arrives when we least expect it. Leave a like if you're enjoying the story and comment from which city you're following Marina and Robert. Let's discover together what destiny has in store for them. Monday arrived grey in Miami, with that fine drizzle that seemed to penetrate to the bones. Marina woke up earlier than usual. The pain in her arm had kept her awake for most of the night. While preparing weak coffee in the tiny kitchen, she heard, Edward snoring in the next room, and allowed herself a few minutes of peace before reality reached her again. On the way to work, squeezed in the crowded bus that ran the Key Biscayne Coral Gables route, Marina rested her forehead against the fogged window and watched the city waking up. Street vendors were already at their posts, housewives hung clothes on the lines of small houses, and the intense movement of the streets contrasted with the silence she carried within herself. Robert on his part had woken up in his South Beach penthouse with a strange restlessness. While having his breakfast prepared by the housekeeper, he distractedly flipped through the financial newspaper, but his thoughts kept returning to the young woman from the warehouse. He decided he would return to the factory that day, but this time with a more elaborate pretext. "Mr. Robert," said Carmen, the 55-year-old woman who had taken care of his house for more than a decade, "you seem worried today." Robert looked up from the newspaper. Carmen was one of the few people who dared to make personal comments. Coming from Puerto Rico, she had the simple wisdom of someone who had raised 5 children working hard. "It's not worry, Carmen. It's curiosity." "Curiosity about what?" "About how people really live. Sometimes I feel like I live in a bubble." Carmen smiled in that maternal way that always calmed him. "Are you discovering that money doesn't buy peace of mind?" Robert didn't answer, but the phrase echoed in his mind throughout the entire trip to the factory. At Johnson & Sons, Marina had arrived punctually at 7 a.m. Her workstation was in an area with good visibility of the warehouse, near the large windows that let in natural light. She liked that location because she could see the street movement and sometimes even some birds that perched on the electrical wires. Around 10 a.m., when the work pace was already intense, Robert appeared in the warehouse accompanied by Carlos, Martinez, the production manager. Carlos, a 40-year-old man, thin and always nervous, had worked alongside Robert's father for more than 15 years. He was considered almost family by the Johnsons, but had the habit of treating employees with unnecessary harshness. "As I said, Mr. Robert, our productivity has maintained the average." Carlos spoke quickly, consulting a clipboard. "We have some employees who stand out, like Marina over there." He discreetly pointed to where she worked. "Never absent, never complains, production always on time." Robert tried to appear casual, but his gaze immediately fixed on Marina. She was concentrated, with her hair tied simply, and wore a long-sleeved blouse despite the warehouse heat. When she looked up for a moment to rest her eyes, their gazes met. It was a brief moment, maybe 2 seconds, but Marina felt something different. It wasn't like the inappropriate looks she sometimes received from some colleagues or her uncle himself. It was a look of genuine interest, curiosity. She couldn't define it, but felt strangely seen, as if she truly existed. Robert, for his part, was impacted by the intensity of her blue eyes. Even from a distance, he could perceive a mixture of tiredness and strength that intrigued him deeply. "How long has she worked here?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Marina, about 3 years, more or less. Started right after her mother died. Poor girl, was left alone in the world. Lives with an uncle who also works here." "Edward, what happened to her mother?" Carlos hesitated for a moment. "Work accident. It was a complicated situation. Grace was a good seamstress but had a problem with one of the old machines. Unfortunately, we couldn't do much." Robert frowned. There was something in the way Carlos spoke that didn't completely convince him, but he decided not to deepen the subject at that moment. During the rest of the morning, Robert found excuses to remain in the warehouse. He talked with other employees, observed the production processes, but always kept Marina in his peripheral vision. At lunchtime, he noticed she didn't head to the cafeteria like the others. Instead, she remained at her station, taking out a small snack from a plastic bag. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. He spent more on a single meal than she probably received in an entire day. It was then that he made an impulsive decision. He approached her for the first time. "Excuse me," he said, with the softest a voice he could manage. Marina looked up, clearly surprised. "You're Marina, aren't you?" She nodded, unable to speak. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the sandwich she was eating. "I'm Robert Johnson. Sorry to bother you during your lunch break, but I wanted to congratulate you on your work. Carlos told me you're one of the best employees." "Thank you, sir," Marina managed to murmur, still in shock. The company owner was there, talking to her, and his voice was gentle, not intimidating. As she had imagined. "Do you like what you do?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked if she liked the work. Working was a necessity, not a choice. It's honest work," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "But do you like it?" Marina looked at him for a longer moment. There was something in his blue eyes that made her feel she could be honest. "I always dreamed of being a fashion designer," she admitted quietly. "But life had other plans." Robert felt like he had been punched in the stomach. The simplicity and honesty of that response touched him more than any business conversation he had ever had. "Do you draw?" Marina hesitated, then nodded shyly. "Sometimes, but they're just sketches." "I'd like to see some someday," he said, and immediately realized he might have been too intimate. "I mean, the company is always interested in internal talents for the design sector." Marina looked at him with a mixture of hope and distrust. She was too accustomed to disappointments to believe easily. Would it be possible?" "Everything is possible," Robert replied, and for the first time in a long time, he himself believed in those words. The conversation was interrupted by the return of other employees from lunch. Marina quickly gathered her things, murmured a thank you, and returned to work. But something had changed. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to have hope. Robert returned to the office with his mind buzzing. He couldn't stop thinking about the conversation, about the vulnerability Marina had shown in admitting her dream, about the way her eyes had shone for a moment when she talked about drawing. That night, Marina arrived home still thinking about the conversation. Edward was in the living room, as always, but she barely registered his presence. In her room, she took out an old notebook where she kept her drawings and flipped through the pages with renewed affection. Maybe, just maybe, dreams weren't dead. Maybe there was still time to sow a different life. On the other side of the city, Robert looked through the window of his penthouse at the lights of Miami and made a decision. He would find out more about Marina Johnson, not just as an employee, but as a person. There was something about her that had awakened something in his heart that he thought was asleep forever. Destiny had begun to weave its threads, uniting two lives that seemed destined to remain in parallel worlds, but were about to intertwine unexpectedly. The following days brought a different routine for Marina. Robert began appearing in the warehouse more frequently, always with some official excuse, but she had begun to notice that he was watching her. It wasn't an inappropriate or predatory look. It was something she couldn't completely define, but that made her feel strangely special. A week after their first conversation, Robert appeared at the factory on a rainy Thursday carrying a document folder. He headed directly to Marina's station, who pretended not to notice his approach, but felt her heart racing. "Marina," he called softly, "would you have a moment to talk, in private?" She looked around, noticing the curious looks from colleagues. Edward, who worked a few rows ahead, had also noticed and frowned with suspicion. "Of course, Mr. Johnson," she replied, standing up and smoothing the simple skirt she wore. Robert led her to a small meeting room that was on the warehouse mezzanine, with a view of the entire warehouse floor. Marina had never entered there. It was a space reserved for supervisors and important visitors. The walls were glass, which meant everything would be visible to anyone who wanted to observe. "Please sit down," Robert said, indicating one of the padded chairs around the oval table. Marina sat on the edge of the chair, clearly uncomfortable. Her hands were clasped in her lap, and she avoided looking directly at him. "First, I want to apologize if I made you feel uncomfortable with my frequent visits," Robert began, sitting across from her. "It wasn't my intention." "There was no problem, sir," Marina replied quietly. "Please just call me Robert. Mr. Johnson was my father." She nodded, but he realized she would continue calling him sir anyway. "I want to be direct with you, Marina. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation about your drawings. Did you bring some to show me?" Marina hesitated, then opened the old bag she always carried and took out a hardcover notebook already well used. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the table. "They're really just sketches," she murmured, embarrassed. Robert opened the notebook carefully, like someone handling something precious. What he saw genuinely impressed him. The pages were full of drawings of women's clothing, elegant dresses, elaborate blouses, skirts with unique details. The stroke was firm and creative, showing natural talent refined by observation and constant practice. "Marina," he said, looking up at her, "these aren't sketches. These are professional designs." She finally looked directly at him, and he could see tears forming in her blue eyes. "Do you really think so, sir?" "I'm sure." Robert turned a few more pages, each one revealing more talent. "Have you ever thought about taking a fashion course, or at least a technical design course?" Marina lowered her eyes again. "I can't afford it. And even if I could," she hesitated. "Even if you could what?" "My uncle, he wouldn't approve. Says these are rich girl fantasies and that I need to keep my feet on the ground." Robert felt growing anger in his chest. He was beginning to better understand Marina's situation, and he didn't like what he was discovering. "Marina, can I ask a personal question?" She nodded, but her body stiffened. "Those marks on your arm, how did you hurt yourself?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marina instinctively pulled her blouse sleeves, covering her wrists. And he realized he had touched a very sensitive point. "I fell," she lied, but her voice had no conviction. "Marina," Robert spoke softly, leaning forward a little. "You don't need to be afraid of me. I won't judge you, whatever the truth is." The tears she had been holding back finally began to fall. She covered her face with her hands, and her shoulders trembled with years of contained crying. Robert had the impulse to get up and comfort her, but realized this might scare her even more. Instead, he remained seated, waiting patiently until she composed herself. "It wasn't a fall," she finally admitted, her voice muffled by her hands. "My uncle. He sometimes, when he drinks—" Robert closed his fists on the table, fighting to control the anger he felt. "How long has this been happening?" "Since I went to live with him, after my mother died." "And you never reported it? Never sought help?" Marina raised her face, and the expression of despair he saw almost made him get up. "From the chair. To whom? To say what? That I'm an orphan without money, being mistreated by the only relative who agreed to take me in? Who's going to believe? Who's going to care?" The brutal honesty of that response hit Robert like a slap. He realized how much his privileged life had shielded him from the reality that people like Marina faced every day. "I care," he said, and the words came out with more intensity than he intended. Marina looked at him with surprise and distrust. "Why? I'm nobody important. Don't say that." Robert's voice was firm, almost harsh. "You are important. Your talent is important. Your life is important." They looked at each other in silence for a long moment. Marina felt as if she was seeing Robert for the first time, not as the company owner or the rich man, but as a person who genuinely cared about her. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. The question caught him off guard. What did he want? Initially, it had been curiosity, then compassion. But now, "I want to help you," he replied honestly. "I want you to have the chance to be who you really are, not just survive." And in exchange, Robert realized she was accustomed to negotiations where she always came out losing. "There's no exchange, Marina. It doesn't work like that." "It always works like that," she replied with bitterness. "Rich men don't help poor girls for free. They always want something." His response came without hesitation. "Then give me the chance to be different." Marina studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher his true intentions. Finally, she nodded almost imperceptibly. "What do you propose?" "First, a safe place for you to live. I have some small properties that stay empty. Nothing luxurious, but clean and safe." "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because I can't pay for it." "Who said you need to pay?" Marina shook her head vigorously. "I don't accept charity." Robert thought quickly. "Then it won't be charity. It will be an investment." "How so?" "You're going to study fashion design. I'll pay for the course, and you work part-time here at the factory, part-time studying. When you graduate, you come work in our design department. Consider it a loan that will be deducted from your future salary." Marina remained silent for several minutes, processing the proposal. It was everything she had always dreamed of, but it seemed too good to be true. "And my uncle? What about him? He won't let me leave. He needs—" "My salary." "Edward Miller has worked here for 15 years, Robert said, and Marina realized he had investigated. "He earns enough to support himself alone. If he has financial problems, it's not because of you. You don't know him like I do. He can be violent." Robert leaned forward, and his voice became lower and more intense. "Marina, look at me." She obeyed, and saw a determination in his eyes that made her feel protected for the first time in years. "No one will hurt you while I'm Around, that's a promise. For a moment, Marina allowed herself to believe that maybe, finally, someone really cared about her. But years of disappointments had made her cautious. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked once more. Robert hesitated, because he wasn't sure if he was ready to admit the truth, not even to himself. But something in her eyes made him be honest. "Because since I saw you, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Because you have a talent that deserves to be recognized. And because—" he stopped, took a deep breath, "because I think you can teach me things I need to learn about courage and dignity." Marina felt her heart race. There was a sincerity in his voice that touched her deeply. For the first time in her adult life, someone was really seeing her, not as a victim, not as an employee, but as a person with dreams and potential. "I need to think," she said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Robert got up and walked to the window, looking at the warehouse below. "Marina, there's one more thing I need to tell you." "What?" "About your mother. About the accident." Marina became rigid. "What about it?" "I have some suspicions that it might not have been exactly an accident. At least, not the way it was reported." "What do you mean?" Robert turned to her. "I mean, maybe it's time to discover the truth about what really happened to Grace Johnson." The silence in the room was broken only by the noise of the machines below. Marina felt as if the ground was moving under her feet. Her life, which was already being turned upside down by Robert's proposal, now seemed to be on the verge of a revelation that could change everything she thought she knew about the past. "You would investigate this?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "If you want me to investigate?" Marina looked through the window at the warehouse where she worked, where her mother had died, where she herself had spent the last 3 years of her life. Just surviving. Then she looked at Robert, a man who had entered her life like a hurricane, offering hope when she no longer believed it was possible. "I want to know the truth," she said, with a firmness that surprised them both. "Then we'll find out together." Have you ever felt trapped in a situation where it seemed impossible to escape? Marina is about to discover that sometimes the courage to accept help can be the first step to freedom. What do you think she should do? Comment your opinion. And don't forget to leave a like if you're anxious to know what happens to our Marina. The next few days passed like an emotional roller coaster for Marina. During work, she found herself watching Robert whenever he appeared in the warehouse, trying to figure out if she could really trust him. At night, at home, she avoided being alone with Edward as much as possible, who seemed to be noticing her change in behavior. The following Tuesday, Robert looked for her again, but this time asked to meet. Outside the factory, they arranged to meet at a simple bakery in downtown Coral Gables, a neutral place where she would feel more comfortable. Marina arrived punctually at 6 p.m., wearing her best outfit, a simple black skirt and a white blouse she had bought on sale months before. Robert was already there, sitting at a back table, dressed more casually than she was used to seeing him, jeans and a light blue shirt that enhanced his eyes. He stood up when he saw her arrive, and Marina noticed how he seemed different outside the company environment, more human, less intimidating. "Thank you for coming," he said, pulling out the chair for her to sit. "Thank you for the invitation," Marina replied, still a little tense. Robert ordered 2 coffees and sugar bread to accompany. a simple choice that made Marina feel more at ease. He had researched the bakery and discovered it was a place frequented by workers in the region, nothing sophisticated or intimidating. "How are you feeling after?" "Our conversation?" he asked when they were alone. Marina stirred the sugar in her coffee before answering, confused, hopeful, scared. Scared of what? Of dreaming too much, of you changing your mind, of my uncle finding out and... She didn't finish the sentence. Robert leaned forward. "Marina, about your uncle. I hired a private investigator to investigate some things about your mother's accident. What we discovered isn't easy to hear." Marina's heart raced. "What did you discover?" "First, I want you to know that no matter what I say now, my proposal to help you remains. Actually, after what I discovered, I'm even more certain that I need to do this." Marina nodded, but her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup. "Your mother's accident wasn't just company negligence. There was a serious failure in safety protocols, and this failure was covered up." "Covered up by whom?" Robert hesitated. This was the hardest part. "By Carlos Martinez and by your uncle." Marina went pale. "My uncle?" "Edward was on duty that day. It was his responsibility to check the conditions of the older machines. He signed a false report saying the machine that killed your mother was in perfect condition, when in reality it needed maintenance for weeks." "But why would he do that?" "For money. Carlos paid him and other supervisors to pretend everything was in order. The company saved thousands of dollars in maintenance, and when the accident happened, it was classified as human error by..." "Your mother." Marina felt the world spinning around her. Her mother hadn't died by accident. She had died because of greed, and the man who had raised her since then, who mistreated and humiliated her, was one of those responsible. "My mother..." she began, but couldn't finish. The tears came with full force. Robert didn't hesitate this time. He got up and knelt beside her chair, gently holding her hands. "Marina, look at me." She raised her red eyes to him. "Your mother didn't die because of..." "Her fault. She was the victim of a crime. And you don't owe Edward anything. He owes you explanations." "How do you know all this?" "I have the documents, internal reports, emails between Carlos and the supervisors, even records of extra payments that were made at that time." Marina pulled back slightly, a new realization coming to her. Are you going to report it? Carlos still works for you. I'm going to do what's right. But first, I want to know what you want to do." "What I want?" "It's your mother. It's your justice. The decision should be yours." Marina remained silent for several minutes, processing everything she had heard. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was different, firmer, more determined. "I want them to pay. I want everyone to know the truth about what happened to her." Robert nodded. "Then that's what we're going to do." They spent the next hour talking about legal details, about how to proceed with the reports, about the possible consequences. Marina felt as if she were waking up from a long nightmare and finally seeing the world clearly. "There's one more thing," Robert said when they were getting ready to leave. "About my proposal for you to leave your uncle's house." "What about it?" "It's no longer just a proposal. It's a necessity. When all this comes to light, Edward will know you discovered the truth. I can't let you go back there." Marina felt a mix of relief and terror. "Where will I go?" "I have a small apartment in Coconut Grove. It's..." Been empty for months. It has 2 bedrooms, kitchen, living room. It's simple but safe, and it has a 24-hour doorman. Robert, I can't— It's not charity, he interrupted gently. It's protection, and it's temporary until you can establish yourself. Marina looked into his eyes. There was something there that went beyond compassion or sense of justice. There was something more personal, more intimate. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked for the 3rd time, but now with a different intonation. This time Robert didn't hesitate. "Because I fell in love with you." The silence that followed was deafening. Marina felt as if time had stopped. "How?" she whispered. "I don't know how to explain how it happened. I just know that since the first day I saw you, you haven't left my mind. It's not just your beauty, although you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. It's your strength, your dignity, the way you keep dreaming, even when everything around you tries to destroy your dreams." Marina felt the tears returning, but this time they weren't from sadness. "You barely know me. Then give me the chance to know you better." She studied him for a long moment. Robert Johnson, billionaire, powerful, admired, was there, vulnerable, offering his heart to an orphaned and mistreated seamstress. "What if I disappoint you? What if you discover I'm not who you think I am?" "What if I disappoint you?" he countered. "What if you discover I'm just another rich man, trying to buy what he wants?" Marina smiled for the first time in days. "I think we'll both have to take that risk. Do you think it's worth it?" She extended her hand across the table, and he held it carefully, as if it were something precious. "I think my mother would want me to try to be happy." Robert brought her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. "Then let's try together." That night, Marina arrived home with her heart racing and a determination she hadn't felt in years. Edward was in the living room, drinking and watching television as always. "You're late today," he grumbled. "I had some things to resolve," Marina replied, and for the first time she didn't lower her eyes. Edward looked at her more closely. "What things?" "Things about my life." There was something different in her tone that made Edward suspicious. "What life? Your life is working and helping me pay the bills of this house." Marina took a deep breath. "Not anymore." "What do you mean?" "I know what you did, Edward. I know about the accident with my mother. I know about the false reports. I know about the money you received to stay quiet." Edward's face turned red with anger, but also with fear. "Who filled your head with these lies?" "They're not lies, and you know it." Edward got up from the armchair, staggering slightly. "You don't know anything, girl, and you're going to stop this talk right now." "I'm not going to stop, and tomorrow I'm leaving here." The slap came quickly, but Marina was prepared. She dodged partially, and Edward's hand only grazed her. "You're not going anywhere," he shouted. "Without me, you're nothing. Go back to the gutter your mother came from." Marina looked him in the eyes, and Edward saw something he had never seen before: true strength. "My mother didn't come from the gutter. She was an honest woman who died because men like you chose money over her life. But I'm not going to die here. I'm not going to be another victim of your greed." Edward tried to grab her arm, but Marina moved away. "If you touch me again, I'll scream so loud that all the neighbors will hear, and tomorrow they'll know exactly what kind of man you are." The determination in her voice made him back down. Edward realized he had lost control over Marina, and that scared him. "You're going to regret this," he murmured. "You'll see what the world is like out there without anyone to take care of you." "I'd rather find out than continue being taken care of by you." Marina went to her room and locked the door. For the first time in 3 years, she slept without fear of the next day. On the other side of the city, Robert also couldn't sleep. He had declared his feelings for Marina, and she hadn't pulled back. More than that, she had accepted to fight alongside him for the truth about her mother. He knew the next few days would be difficult. He would have to fire Carlos, face possible lawsuits, deal with negative publicity. But for the first time in his life, he was fighting for something that really mattered. For the first time, he was fighting for love. Friday dawned tense at Johnson & Sons Textiles. Robert had spent the early morning with the company's lawyers, preparing all the necessary documentation for the confrontations that were to come. Marina arrived at work, knowing it would be her last day in the warehouse, and possibly the day everything would change forever. She had packed her few belongings in a small suitcase, which she left hidden in the women's locker room. Robert had insisted that she not spend another night at Edward's house, especially after the previous night's argument. Around 9 a.m., Robert arrived at the factory, accompanied by 2 lawyers and a private investigator. The atmosphere became tense immediately. Employees noticed that something important was happening. Carlos Martinez was called first. Robert summoned him to the main meeting room, the one with large glass windows that allowed the entire warehouse to observe. What was happening inside? "Carlos," Robert began, his voice cold and professional, "we need to talk about some events that happened 3 years ago." Carlos, a thin and nervous man, immediately began to sweat. "What events?" "The fatal accident of Grace Johnson." The silence in the room was deafening. Carlos looked at the lawyers, then at the investigator, and finally back at Robert. "I don't understand where you're going with this." Robert opened a folder and spread documents on the table. "These are falsified maintenance reports. This is correspondence between you and some supervisors about extra payments. And this," he placed a photo on the table, "is the machine that killed Grace, photographed a week before the accident, clearly needing repair." Carlos went pale. "Robert, you don't understand. The pressures at the time, the cost cuts your father demanded." "My father never demanded that you falsify safety reports. My father never told you to buy supervisors' silence. It was a difficult time for the company. Don't try to justify it," Robert interrupted, his voice growing in intensity. "A woman died because you chose to save money instead of ensuring her safety." From the warehouse, Marina watched the scene through the glass windows. She couldn't hear the words, but could see the tension, the gestures, the way Carlos seemed to be being confronted. Other employees had also stopped working to observe. Edward, who worked near the windows, was also seeing. Everything. And gradually he began to understand what was happening. His expression changed from curiosity to concern, and then to panic. In the meeting room, Carlos tried one last defense. "Robert, I worked with your father for 15 years. I was always loyal to the family. Loyalty doesn't include covering up crimes, and it doesn't include allowing innocent employees to be blamed for accidents that were caused by your negligence." Robert's lawyer spoke up. Mr. Martinez, this evidence will be presented to the Department of Labor today. You have the right to an attorney. Carlos collapsed in his chair. He knew he was finished. And now, he asked with a broken voice, now you're fired for just cause, and you'll answer criminally for your actions. Carlos was escorted out of the company by security guards. The entire warehouse was silent, watching one of the most powerful men in the factory being taken away. But Robert wasn't finished. "Call Edward Miller," he said to one of the assistants. Marina felt her heart race. It was her uncle's turn to face the consequences. Edward entered the meeting room trying to appear confident, but his eyes were nervous. He had worked there for 15 years and had known Robert since he was a boy. "Hi, Robert. I heard there were some problems with Carlos. If you need someone trustworthy to take over management..." "Sit down, Edward." Robert's cold tone made Edward realize he wasn't there to be promoted. "Edward, you were on duty the day..." "Of Grace Johnson's accident." "I was. Terrible day that was. Grace was a good woman. You signed the safety report for the machine that killed her." "I signed several reports at that time. I don't specifically remember." Robert placed the document on the table. "This is your report. You certified that the machine was in perfect working condition." Edward looked at the paper and swallowed hard. "If I signed it, it's because it was." "Edward," Robert leaned forward, "you received $500 extra that month, and another $500 the following month, payments that don't appear on your regular payroll." The sweat on Edward's forehead was visible now. "I don't know what you're talking about." "We have the bank records. We have recorded conversations between you and Carlos about how to keep everyone in line after the accident." Edward tried to get up, but the lawyer gestured for him to remain seated. "You accepted money to falsify a safety report. A woman died because of it, and that woman was your sister." "It wasn't like that," Edward began, but his voice had no conviction. "How was it then?" "The machine was old, yes, but it still worked. Nobody imagined it would have problems exactly that day." "Lie!" Robert slammed his hand on the table. "The machine had shown failures the previous week. 3 different employees reported strange noises. You ignored all the warnings because Carlos was paying you to ignore them." Edward finally broke down. "I needed the money. My ex-wife was demanding back alimony. I had debts. So you sold your sister's life for $1,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, Marina saw when her uncle covered his face with his hands. "And there's more," Robert continued. "After the accident, you offered to take care of Grace's daughter, but it wasn't out of kindness. It was out of guilt. And you turned that guilt into anger, mistreating Marina for these 3 years." Edward raised his face, and there were tears in his eyes. "The girl reminds me of Grace. Every time I look at her, I remember what I did." "So you beat her to try to relieve your guilt?" "I never wanted to hurt Marina." "But you did, repeatedly." From the warehouse, Marina saw when Robert stood up and pointed through the window in her direction. Edward looked, and for the first time seemed to really see his niece, not as a burden or source of guilt, but as a person he had deeply hurt. "Edward Miller," the lawyer spoke up. "You're being fired for just cause and will answer criminally for document falsification, culpable negligence resulting in death and mistreatment." Edward offered no resistance when security came to get him. As he passed through the warehouse, he looked at Marina one last time. There was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Genuine remorse, but it was too late. When Edward was taken away, Robert left the meeting room and walked directly to Marina. The entire warehouse was watching. But he didn't care. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Marina nodded, but he could see she was trembling. "Is it over?" "The legal part is just beginning, but for you, yes. It's over." Marina looked around the warehouse, at the machines where she had worked, at the colleagues who watched her with curiosity and compassion, at the place where her mother had died. "Can I leave now? You can go wherever you want." Marina got her suitcase from the locker room and walked back to where Robert was, waiting. When she got close to him, she whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me back my mother." Robert didn't understand immediately. "For 3 years, I thought she had died through her own carelessness, that somehow it had been her fault. Now I know she was just a victim. I can honor her memory without carrying guilt." Robert held her hand. "Your mother was a strong and dignified woman, just like you." They left the factory together, under the gaze of dozens of employees. Some whispered, others smiled, but Marina no longer cared about others' opinions. In the parking lot, Robert stopped before opening the car door. "Marina, before we go to the apartment, I need to say something." "What?" "Everything is going to change now. The media will discover the scandal. There will be investigations, lawsuits. You'll be at the center of all this. Are you sure you're prepared?" Marina looked back at the factory where she had spent 3 years of her life just surviving. Then she looked at Robert, the man who had risked everything to give her justice and a chance to start over. "I'm not prepared," she admitted, "but I'm ready." "What's the difference?" "Being prepared means knowing exactly what's going to happen. Being ready means having the courage to face whatever comes." Robert smiled, and it was a smile full of admiration and love. "Then let's face it together." When they drove away, Marina saw for the last time the place that had been her prison for so long. But now she didn't feel fear or sadness. She felt hope. For the first time in her life, she was going to a place where she would be free to be who she really was, and she wasn't going alone. 3 months later, Marina woke up in her small apartment in Coconut Grove, with the sun coming through the bedroom window. The place was simple but cozy. 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and a bathroom she could call her own. The walls were decorated with her own framed drawings, and on the living room table were fashion design books she studied in the technical course she had enrolled in. Life had changed completely. The Johnson & Sons scandal had made news in local newspapers, and Marina had become involuntarily the face of the fight for labor justice. But with Robert's support and a lawyer specialized in labor rights, she had learned to deal with public attention. Carlos Martinez was responding to criminal proceedings and had been sentenced to pay substantial compensation to Grace's family. Edward was also answering criminally and had lost his job. But in a twist no one expected, he had sought out Marina 2 weeks earlier to ask for forgiveness. The meeting had taken place in the lawyer's office with professional mediation. Edward arrived thin, dejected, clearly destroyed by the weight of his actions. When he saw Marina, he began to cry before he could even speak. "Marina," he had said with a broken voice, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I was a monster to..." But you need to know that I regret every day what I did to you and your mother." Marina had listened in silence. He told about the financial pressures, about how guilt corroded him, about how he had transformed remorse into anger against her. He explained that he beat her because he couldn't live with his own conscience, and that every time he looked at her, he saw Grace accusing him. "That doesn't justify anything I did," he admitted. "But I want you to know that your mother was the most important person in my life after our parents died. And when she died because of me, I died a little too." Marina had remained silent for several minutes. Then she had said something that surprised everyone in the room. "I forgive you, Uncle Edward." "How can you forgive me?" "Because holding anger toward you would be like carrying you inside me for the rest of my life, and I want my new life to be free from everything that hurt me." Edward had left that meeting a slightly less destroyed man. And Marina had left even stronger. Now, 3 months later, she was getting ready for a very special day. It was Friday, and Robert had arranged a romantic dinner to celebrate the end of her first semester of the course. Marina had dedicated herself to her studies with a passion that impressed even the teachers. She chose a dress she had bought with her first salary from the part-time job she had gotten at a women's clothing store in Coconut Grove. It was a simple navy blue dress, but elegant. That enhanced her eyes. She had learned to dress up, to use light makeup, to value herself. The relationship with Robert had evolved naturally and respectfully. He had never pressured for physical intimacy, understanding that Marina needed time to process everything that had happened in her life. They had kissed for the first time 2 weeks earlier, in a spontaneous moment while studying together in the apartment living room. It had been a sweet kiss, full of promises and genuine feelings. Robert had held her face in his hands and whispered, "I love you, Marina Johnson, not because I want to save you, but because you saved me." "How did I save you?" she had asked. "You taught me that there are things more important than money and power. You taught me what real courage is. You taught me the difference between existing and living." The restaurant Robert chose for that night was special. It wasn't too luxurious. He had learned that Marina felt uncomfortable in overly sophisticated environments, but it was cozy and romantic. It was in South Beach, a place Marina had mentioned wanting to visit. When she arrived, Robert was already waiting. He stood up when he saw her, and the smile that spread across his face made her heart race. "You look beautiful," he said, delicately kissing her hand. "Thank you. You look very elegant too." They sat at a reserved table with a view of the busy South Beach street. Marina observed the movement with curiosity. Street artists, college, students, couples walking. It was a completely different world from what she was used to. "How was your day at the store?" Robert asked. "Good. The owner said I'm learning fast about customer service. And I managed to give some suggestions about the window display that she liked. I'm not surprised. You have a natural eye for style. And you? How was it at the company?" Robert sighed. "Difficult. We're still dealing with the legal consequences of everything that happened. But on the other hand, we implemented new safety protocols that should have existed long ago. Do you regret exposing everything?" "Not for a second. It was the most correct thing I've ever done in my life." They talked about Marina's studies, about plans for the future, about small daily things. The naturalness with which they conversed always impressed Marina. With Robert, she could be completely herself. During dessert, Robert became more serious. "Marina, there's something I want to talk to you about." "What?" "About us, about the future." Marina felt her heart race. "What kind of future?" "The kind where we spend the rest of our lives together." She blinked several times, trying to process what she had heard. "Robert, I'm not proposing marriage yet," he said quickly, noticing her nervousness. "I know it's still early for that, but I want you to know that's what I want. I want to build a life with you. Even knowing where I come from, what I've been through, especially because of that." "You're the most courageous woman I know, more genuine, more truthful. I don't want you despite your past. I want you because of who your past has made you become." Marina felt tears forming in her eyes. "I love you too, Robert, more than I imagined it was possible to love someone. So is that it? Are we together for real? To build something real?" "To build something real," she confirmed. Robert held her hand across the table. "There's one more thing I want to propose." "What?" "When you finish the technical course, I want you to come work at the company, not in the warehouse, but in the design department. I want you to help create a clothing line for Johnson & Sons." Marina was speechless. "Are you serious?" "Completely. The company needs to modernize, diversify, and it needs to do it with someone who understands both fabrics and dreams." "But I'm still just a student." "You're a talented woman who knows what it means to work hard and dream big. That's exactly what we need." Marina looked through the restaurant window at the pulsing life of the street. 6 months ago, she couldn't even imagine she would be there, in a place like that, planning a future that seemed impossible. "I accept," she said, turning her gaze back to him. "I accept working with you. I accept building something together. I accept betting on our love." Robert smiled, a smile that lit up his entire face. "So we're really doing this. We're really doing this." They left the restaurant holding hands, walking unhurriedly through the South Beach streets. The October weather in Miami was pleasant, and they took the opportunity to talk about dreams, about the company they would transform together, about the family they might one day build. "You know what's funny?" Marina said as they stopped in front of a clothing store window. "What?" "For years, I thought my life had ended when my mother died, that I would never be happy again, that I would never have a real chance. And now I realize that life was just waiting for the right moment to really begin." Robert pulled her closer, hugging her right there on the sidewalk. "Your mother would be proud of you." "Do you really think so?" "I'm sure. You honored her memory in the best possible way, transforming pain into strength, injustice into fight, loneliness into love." Marina stepped back a little to look into his eyes. "And you, what did you transform?" "Privilege into responsibility, power into protection, selfishness into love." They kissed there, under the lights of the South Beach streetlights, surrounded by Miami's nighttime movement. It was a kiss that sealed not only the love between them, but also the commitment to build together something greater than themselves. 6 months later, Marina was in the Johnson & Sons office, but it was no longer the same place where she had worked as a seamstress. It was the design department, which had been created especially for her and her team. The walls were covered with her drawings, fabric samples, inspiration photos. She had graduated from the technical course with the best grades in the class and, fulfilling Robert's promise, had begun working on developing the company's first women's clothing line. The collection would be called Grace, a tribute to her mother. "Marina!" called Beatrice, her assistant and friend, a young woman recently graduated in fashion. The samples from the new collection arrived from the factory. Marina looked up from the computer, where she was finishing the technical drawings. At 21 years old, she had become a confident woman, elegant without losing simplicity, professional without losing sensitivity. "Let's see," she said, getting up from the desk. The pieces were beautiful. Dresses that combined elegance with practicality, blouses that enhanced femininity without sacrificing comfort, skirts that worked for both work and special occasions. It was accessible fashion for real women. It turned out perfect. Beatrice commented, holding one of the dresses. "Your mother would be proud," Marina smiled. "I hope so." The office door opened and Robert entered carrying a bouquet of flowers. Even after almost a year together, Marina still felt her heart race when she saw him. "How are my favorite designer's creations?" he asked, kissing her cheek. "Your only designer," she corrected, laughing. "My only designer, my only girlfriend, my only passion," he admitted, making Beatrice pretend to be nauseated by so much romance. "You two are impossible," Beatrice commented, leaving the room. "I'm going to leave you alone with all this sugar." When they were alone, Robert became more serious. "How do you feel 1 week before the collection launch?" "Nervous, excited, terrified, everything at the same time." "It's normal, but you can be sure it's going to be a success." Marina looked through the office windows, which overlooked the factory warehouse. Even from up there, she could see the place where she had worked as a seamstress, where her mother had died, where everything had begun to change. "Sometimes, I still can't believe this is my life," she admitted. "Why not?" "Because for a long time, I thought people like me didn't deserve to have dreams come true." Robert approached her, holding her hands. "Marina Johnson, you deserve all the dreams in the world, and you deserve to fulfill them. Even though I came from where I came from? Especially because you came from where you came from. You know the value of things because you fought for them." Marina rested her head on his chest, listening to the heartbeats she had learned to love. "Robert." "Yes? I love you. Not just because you saved me, but because you taught me I could save myself. And I love you because you taught me that true success isn't measured in money, but in how many lives you can touch for the better." They remained embraced for a few minutes, watching through the window the movement of the factory. Employees worked in safe conditions, with new equipment, rigorous safety protocols. Never again would a Grace die there from negligence. "Marina," Robert said softly. "Yes? There's something I want to ask you." She stepped back to look into his eyes and noticed he was nervous. "What is it?" Robert stepped back a little, put his hand in his jacket pocket, and to Marina's complete surprise, knelt right there in the office. "Marina Johnson," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "you transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. You taught me about courage, about justice, about true love. I can no longer imagine a future that isn't by your side." Marina covered her mouth with her hands, tears already forming in her eyes. "Will you marry me?" he asked, opening a small velvet box that contained a simple and elegant ring, not ostentatious but beautiful. "Do you want to build an entire life with me?" Marina looked at him, the man who had transformed her life, who had fought for justice, for eat. Her mother, who had believed in her dreams when she herself no longer believed. She looked around the office, the space that represented everything she had achieved with work and determination. She looked through the window at the future that stretched ahead of them. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Robert stood up and kissed her, and it was a kiss that contained all the promise of a future built on true love, mutual respect, and shared dreams. 2 years. Later, the First Baptist Church of Coral Gables was decorated with simple but elegant flowers. Marina had chosen that church because it was where her mother used to pray when she was alive. It was small and welcoming, perfect for the intimate wedding they desired. Marina was in the adjacent hall, putting the finishing touches on the wedding dress she had designed herself. It was a simple dress, white satin, with a cut that enhanced her silhouette without being extravagant. The veil was her. Mother's, the only valuable item she had inherited. "You look radiant," said Carmen, who had become a maternal figure in Marina's life. Robert's housekeeper had insisted on helping with the wedding preparations. "I'm nervous," Marina admitted. "It's normal. But look at you, an independent woman with her own career, marrying for love with a man who respects and admires you. Your mother would be bursting with pride." Marina smiled, delicately touching the necklace she wore. A small cross that had belonged to Grace. The music began to play, and Marina walked to the church door. Outside, Robert waited for her at the altar, wearing an elegant but not ostentatious suit. When their eyes met, both smiled. She walked alone down the aisle. She had chosen not to have any man giving her away because no one owned her to give to another. She was there by her own choice, as a free woman choosing to share her life with the man she loved. In the front row were the people who really mattered. Beatrice, her assistant and friend, some work colleagues, Carmen, and in a surprise that had deeply touched Marina, 3 employees from the old factory who had become her friends. In the second row, alone, sat Edward. Marina had decided to invite him, not because she had forgotten what he had done, but because she had learned that forgiveness was more powerful than anger. He was sober, thinner, and clearly still carried the weight of his errors. But there was relief in his eyes seeing Marina. Happy. The ceremony was simple and moving. They had written their own vows, and when it was Marina's turn to speak, her voice was firm and clear. "Robert, when we met, I was a woman who had forgotten how to dream. You didn't just give me back my dreams, you taught me that I deserved to see them fulfilled. I promised to be by your side, not as someone you saved, but as your partner, your equal, your life companion. I promised to grow with you, fight by your side, and build a future where our love is the foundation of everything we do." Robert, in turn, could barely control his emotion. "Marina, you taught me that a person's true value isn't in what they possess, but in what they're capable of overcoming. I promise to honor your strength, support your dreams, and never forget that the greatest privilege of my life is loving you. I promise to be worthy of the love of a woman who transformed pain into hope and injustice into change." When the priest declared them husband and wife, and they Hist, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. 5 years later, Marina was in her office at the Johnson & Sons headquarters, which was now a completely different company. The Grace line had become a national success, and Marina was recognized as one of the most promising young designers in the country. But what made her most proud wasn't the commercial success. It was the social project she had created alongside the company. The Grace Institute offered free sewing and design courses for women in vulnerable situations, and many of her students had already gotten jobs or started small businesses. "Marina," Beatrice called through the door, "there's someone here to see you." "Who is it?" "A young woman. Says she wants to talk about the institute." Marina looked at the clock. It was almost time to leave. Robert was waiting for her at home for dinner, and she didn't like to be late. But something in Beatrice's expression made her curious. "Send her in." The young woman who entered was about 18 years old, thin, with simple clothes and eyes that Marina immediately recognized. They were eyes of someone who had suffered but still had hope. "Mrs. Johnson," the girl said timidly, "my name is Julia Miller." Marina frowned. The surname made her remember something. "You are Edward Miller's daughter, your ex-uncle." Marina remained silent for a moment, processing the information. She knew Edward had a daughter, but had never met her. "What can I do for you, Julia?" "My father. He told me everything, about what he did to your mother, about how he mistreated you. He's very sick now, liver cancer, and spends his days apologizing for everything." Marina felt a tightness in her chest. "I'm sorry to know he's sick." "He didn't send me here," Julia continued quickly. "Actually, he doesn't even know I came, but I needed to meet you." "Why?" "Because my father changed a lot after everything that happened. He stopped drinking, started working, tried to be a better father to me, and he always said it was you who taught him about forgiveness." Marina sat down, gesturing for Julia to do the same. "How so?" "He always tells about the day you forgave him. Says it was the first day in years he could look at himself in the mirror without feeling hatred for himself." Tears formed in Marina's eyes. She had no idea that her decision to forgive Edward had had such a profound impact. "And you came here why, Julia?" "Because I want to be like you. I want to learn to transform bad things into good things. I want to enroll in the institute." Marina smiled, recognizing in the young woman before her the same determination she had felt years before. "Do you have any experience with sewing?" "A little. My grandmother taught me before she died. But I want to learn design. I want to create clothes that make other women feel beautiful." "And what do you do currently?" "I work at a diner in the morning and study at night. I finished high school last year." Marina stood up and walked to the window. Below, she could see employees leaving the factory at the end of the workday. Many were young women like Julia, fighting for a chance to have a better life. "Julia," she said, turning to the young woman, "you can start at the institute next Monday." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Really?" "Really. And there's more. If you dedicate yourself and show talent, you can get a scholarship to take a college fashion course." Julia stood up and, unable to contain herself, hugged Marina. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll work hard, I promise." After Julia left, Marina remained alone in her office for a few minutes, reflecting on the turns life takes. The daughter of the man who had mistreated her was there, seeking the same opportunity she herself had received years before. Robert appeared at the door, as he did every night to pick her up. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "More than ready," she replied, getting her purse. In the car, while Robert drove, through Miami's streets, Marina told about Julia's visit. "Are you going to help her?" he asked. "Of course. How could I not help? Even being Edward's daughter. Especially because she's his daughter. Children shouldn't pay for their parents' mistakes." Robert smiled, a mixture of admiration and love. "That's why I love you. You're incapable of closing a door to someone who's seeking a chance." "I learned from the best," she replied, holding his hand. They arrived home, a medium-sized house in Coral Gables, near where Marina had grown up. It wasn't a mansion, but it was cozy and full of love. The walls were decorated with photos from their travels, Marina's diplomas, some of the first drawings she had made, and a framed photo of Grace in a place of honor in the living room. After dinner, they sat on the living room sofa, Marina with her head resting on Robert's shoulder. "Robert." "Yes?" "Do you regret anything? Changing your whole life because of me?" He laughed softly. "Marina." "Johnson, in 5 years of marriage you still ask questions like that? It's just that sometimes I think about what your life was like before you met me. Parties, travels, freedom. You want to know what my life was like before you? I do. Empty. Rich but empty. Comfortable but without purpose. I had everything money could buy, but I didn't have anything that really mattered. And now? Now I have a wife who inspires me every day. I have a company that makes a difference in people's lives. I have a purpose that goes beyond profit. I have a life worth living." Marina turned to look into his eyes. "And there's one more thing." "What?" Marina smiled, a mysterious smile he had learned to recognize. "There's going to be someone to inherit everything we've built together." Robert took a few seconds to understand. When he understood, his eyes widened. "Marina, are you pregnant?" 2 months. Robert kissed her with an intensity that surprised her, then stepped back to look into her eyes. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I took 3 different tests. How do you feel?" "Happy, scared, excited, everything at the same time." "And how can I feel?" "However you want." "Then can I feel like the happiest man in the world?" "You can." They kissed again, and then remained embraced, imagining the future that was to come. A child who would grow up knowing their mother's story of struggle, their father's values of justice, and mainly the transformative power of true love. That night, before sleeping, Marina looked at her mother's photo on the bedside table. "Mom," she whispered, "I made it. I managed to sow a beautiful life. And now I'm going to teach your grandson or granddaughter to do the same." On the other side of the bed, Robert slept peacefully, with a smile on his face. Outside, Miami continued its frenetic pace, but inside that house there was peace, love, and the promise of an even more beautiful future. Marina had started as a young seamstress who believed. Her life would always be a torn fabric, impossible to mend, but she had learned that with the right hands, the right heart, and the right love, any fabric can be transformed into a work of art. And so, stitch by stitch, she had sewn not just clothes, but an entire life made of fulfilled dreams, conquered justice, and true love. The sewing machine that once symbolized only survival now represented creation, transformation, and hope. And Marina Johnson, Grace's daughter, Robert's wife, successful businesswoman and future mother, slept that night knowing that her story, like all great love stories, was just beginning. The December sun gently warmed the garden of the house in Coral Gables when Marina Johnson Montenegro came out to water the flowers she had planted in the small flower bed near the porch. At 28 years old, she carried a mature and serene beauty. Her brown hair now reached her shoulders, and her blue eyes shone with the wisdom of someone who had conquered every dream through hard work and determination. "Mommy!" shouted a childish voice from inside the house. "Grandma Carmen said Daddy's home!" Marina smiled, hearing the voice of Grace Montenegro Johnson, Gracie, as she was affectionately called by her parents. The 5-year-old girl had inherited her father's penetrating blue eyes and her mother's brown hair. But mainly, she had inherited the insatiable curiosity and strong personality of both. "I'm coming, my love," Marina replied, drying her hands on the flowered apron she wore over the light blue dress, one of her own creations from the company's new casual line. Upon entering the house, Marina found Robert in the living room, still wearing his work suit, but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. At 40 years old, he was even more handsome. Some grey strands at his temples gave him a distinguished air, and the years of happiness had softened the tension lines that once marked his face. Gracie was hanging on her father's neck, animatedly telling about her day at school, while Robert listened with the total attention he always dedicated to his daughter. In his arms, Peter Montenegro Johnson, 2 years old, slept peacefully, a miniature copy of his father, but with his mother's calm temperament. "How was your day?" Marina asked, kissing Robert on the cheek before taking Peter in her arms. "Intense. We had the final meeting for the Grace Institute expansion to Atlanta. They approved the project." Marina smiled widely. "Really? We got it?" "We got it. Starting next year, we'll have units in 5 American cities." Gracie interrupted her parents' conversation by pulling on her mother's skirt. "Mommy, Aunt Julia came to the Institute today and said she has a surprise for you." Marina smiled. Julia Miller had become much more than an Institute student. She was almost like a younger sister. After graduating with honors from the fashion design course, she had been hired as Marina's assistant and was now the regional coordinator of the social project. What kind of surprise? She didn't want to tell, said it was a secret until Daddy got home. Robert and Marina exchanged curious looks. Julia rarely kept secrets. "Where is she?" asked Robert. "In the kitchen, helping Grandma Carmen with dinner," replied Gracie, already running toward the kitchen. The family followed the girl. In the kitchen they found Carmen, now 62 years old, but still as energetic as ever, teaching Julia how to season chicken for dinner. Julia, at 25, had completely blossomed. She was a confident young woman, talented and passionate about the work she did. "Julia," Marina called. "Gracie said you have a surprise." Julia turned with a radiant smile on her face. "I do. But first, how are my heart niece and nephew?" She kissed Gracie and made a funny face at Peter, who laughed heartily in his mother's arms. "Now tell us this surprise," insisted Robert, "or I won't survive the curiosity." Julia took a deep breath, clearly nervous and excited at the same time. "Remember the application we made for the National Social Impact Award?" Marina nodded. They had entered the Grace Institute in the category of projects that most transformed lives in the country, but didn't have high hopes. The competition was strong. "We won," Julia said simply. The silence that followed was broken by Gracie's scream of joy, who didn't completely understand what it meant, but realized it was something very good. "What do you mean?" Marina asked, thinking she had heard wrong. "We won first place in the social transformation category. The Grace Institute was considered the most impactful social project in the United States last year." Marina felt tears forming in her eyes. Robert hugged her tightly, while Peter drooled happily on his mother's blouse, oblivious to the adult's emotion. "I can't believe it," Marina whispered. "I can't believe we did it." "And there's more," Julia continued, barely able to contain her own emotion. "The award ceremony will be televised, and they want to do a special feature about our story, about how everything began." Carmen, who had followed Marina's entire growth over the years, dried her eyes with her apron. "Your mother was right when she said you were special, girl." That night, after the children went to sleep, Marina and Robert sat on the house porch, watching the stars and processing the day's news. "Do you remember how everything began?" Marina asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "How could I forget? A young seamstress with purple marks on her arm and dreams hidden in an old notebook. And a rich businessman who decided to do the right thing for the first time in his life." "It wasn't the first time," Robert corrected gently. "It was the first time I found something worth fighting for." Marina stepped back to look into his eyes. "Robert, sometimes I think about all the women who have gone through the Institute. More than 2,000 in 7 years. 2,000 stories of new beginnings. And all because of a woman who had the courage to accept help and then decided to help others. It wasn't just me. It was us. It always was us." Robert kissed her softly. "And it always will be us." The following weekend, they received an unexpected visit. Marina was playing in the garden with the children when Julia arrived, accompanied by an older man, thin and clearly debilitated, but clean and wearing simple, dignified clothes. It was Edward. Marina felt her heart race, but not from fear. It was a mixture of surprise and compassion. Edward seemed to have aged much more than the 7 years that had passed. Cancer had taken its toll, but there was something different in his eyes, a peace she had never seen before. "Marina," Julia approached nervously, "my father asked to come thank you personally. He doesn't have much time." Marina stood up, cleaning the dirt from her hands on her pants. Gracie and Peter ran inside the house upon sensing the adults' tension. "Edward," Marina said simply. "Marina," he replied, his voice weaker than she remembered. "Thank you for receiving me. Would you like to sit? I can make coffee." They sat at the small garden table. Robert appeared at the door, clearly protective, but Marina made a discreet gesture indicating everything was okay. "How are you feeling?" Marina asked. "Physically not very well, but at peace for the first time in many years." Edward looked around, observing the simple but cozy house, the well-tended flowers, the children's toys scattered around the garden. "You built a beautiful life," he said sincerely. "Thank you." "Marina, I came here because I need to say some things before it's too late." She nodded, prepared to listen. "First, about your mother. Grace was the best person I knew in life. When our parents died, she took care of me as if I were her son, not her brother. And I killed her out of greed." His voice broke, but he continued. "Second, about you. When I brought you home, I thought I was doing a good deed, but I turned you into the escape valve for my guilt. Every slap I gave you was a pathetic attempt to relieve the weight of what I had done." Marina felt tears in her eyes, but remained silent. "Third, about the forgiveness you gave me in that room years ago. You had no obligation to forgive me. I didn't deserve forgiveness, but when you said those words, it was as if you had given me back my soul." Edward leaned forward, looking directly into her eyes. "Marina, you saved me. You didn't just forgive me, you saved me. After that day, I stopped drinking, got an honest job, tried to be a decent father to Julia, all because a woman I had hurt chose to give me a second chance." "Edward, let me finish, please. Julia tells me about the Institute, about all the women you're helping. She tells me you always say you learned about forgiveness from your mother, but I think Grace learned about forgiveness from you." Marina couldn't hold back the tears anymore. "You transformed your pain into purpose. You transformed my daughter into an extraordinary woman. You even transformed a violent drunk into a man who can sleep peacefully." Edward stood up with difficulty. "I didn't come here seeking more forgiveness. I came to thank you. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to be a better person." Marina also stood up, and to everyone's surprise, including her own, hugged Edward. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "Thank you for becoming the man Julia deserved to have as a father." When they separated, Edward had tears in his eyes. Can I meet your children, just from afar? I don't want to scare them." Marina called Gracie and Peter, who came out shyly from the house. "Children," she said, "this is Aunt Julia's father." Gracie, always brave, approached. "Hi, sir. Are you sick?" "I am, little one. But being here today made me feel much better." Peter, still shy, waved from the safety of his mother's arms. "They're beautiful," Edward said. "Grace would be very proud to see you as a mother." After Edward's farewell, Marina remained thoughtful for several days. Robert respected her silence, understanding she needed to process the encounter. The following week, the news everyone expected but still hurt arrived. Edward had died peacefully in his sleep. Julia was devastated, but there was also gratitude in her pain. She had had the chance to have a real father in his last years of life. Marina and Robert went to the wake. It was small, simple, but dignified. Julia had managed to gather some of Edward's work colleagues and neighbors who had become friends in recent years. During the burial, Marina placed a flower on the coffin and whispered, "Thank you for showing me that people can change. Rest in peace." 2 months later, the day of the National Awards ceremony arrived. Marina was nervous. She didn't like appearing on television, but knew the exposure would be important for the Institute. The ceremony took place in Washington, D.C., at a luxury hotel. Marina wore a navy blue dress she had designed especially for the occasion, elegant but sober, reflecting her personality. When they called the Grace Institute's name as the winner, Marina went up on stage, accompanied by Julia and 3 students from the project who had managed to open their own businesses. In her speech, Marina spoke about her mother, about the importance of giving opportunities to women in vulnerable situations, about how small actions can generate great transformations, but it was at the end that her voice became emotional. "This award isn't mine. It belongs to all the women who had the courage to start over. It belongs to my mother, Grace Johnson, who taught me that dignity isn't negotiable. It belongs to my husband, who showed me that true love is partnership. It belongs to Julia, who proved that children aren't responsible for their parents' mistakes. And it belongs to every woman who is still in a difficult situation, but hasn't given up on dreaming." The audience stood up in emotional applause. In the front rows, Robert cried with pride, while Carmen held Gracie and Peter, who clapped without completely understanding, but feeling the emotion of the moment. On the way home, on the plane, Marina looked through the window at Miami's lights approaching. "What are you thinking about?" Robert asked. "About how strange life is. 10 years ago, I was a scared seamstress who thought she would never leave that warehouse. Today, we're returning from Washington after receiving a national award. And what changed? I learned that it doesn't matter where you're born or what happens to you. What matters is what you choose to do with your story. And you chose to transform your story into hope for other people. We chose," she corrected, "always we." Back in Coral Gables, life resumed its normal rhythm. But now, with national recognition, new invitations and opportunities arose. Companies wanted to sponsor the institute. Universities wanted partnerships. Other NGOs wanted to learn from the methodology they had developed. Marina knew she needed to be careful. She didn't want success to destroy the essence of the project, which had always been personal and humanized. One Thursday afternoon, she was in the institute office when Julia entered with a strange expression. "Marina, there's a call for you. It's from a woman in Houston. She said it's very important." Curious, Marina answered the phone. "Hello? Marina Johnson Montenegro?" asked a female voice with a Texan accent. "Yes, that's me. My name is Rosa Perez. I'm a social worker here in Houston. I saw your television interview about the Institute." "Yes. How can I help you?" "I have a situation here very similar to what you experienced. A 19-year-old girl, orphan, being mistreated by the uncle who should protect her. She works in a textile factory under precarious conditions and has an incredible talent for drawing clothes." Marina felt her heart race. It was as if time had come full circle. "How can I help?" "The girl saw your story on TV and said she wanted to talk to you. I know it's a lot to ask, but what's her name?" "Amanda. Amanda Silva." "Rosa, give me her phone number. I'll call today." That night, Marina called Amanda. The conversation lasted 2 hours. On the other side of the line was a young woman with the same mixture of fear and hope she herself had felt years before. "Amanda," Marina said at the end of the conversation, "do you want to come to Miami? We have an opening at the Institute, and I can get you a part-time job at a clothing store here." "You would do that for me? But you don't know me." "I do know you. I was once you." A week later, Amanda arrived in Miami with a small suitcase and eyes full of hope. Marina and Robert received her at the airport, and when they saw her, they smiled. It was like seeing Marina 10 years earlier. "Amanda." Marina said, hugging the young woman, "Welcome to your new life." That night in bed, Marina told Robert about the strange feeling she had when seeing Amanda. "It's like a cycle closing," she said. "Someone helped me, I helped others, and now I can help someone who is exactly where I was." And do you think you'll be able to transform her life like yours was transformed? No, Marina replied, surprising him. I'm going to help her transform her own life. That's the difference. Robert smiled in the dark. That's why I love you. You always manage to surprise me. The following Sunday, Marina was in the garden with the children when Gracie asked an unexpected question. Mommy, why do you help so many people? Marina stopped watering the flowers and knelt at her daughter's height. Because when I was little like you, someone helped me when I needed it most. And because I believe that when we're happy, we have the obligation to help other people be happy too. And Daddy? Does he help too? Of course. Daddy taught me that people with more resources have more responsibility to take care of those who need it. Peter, who was playing with a toy car on the grass, looked up. Mummy, when I grow up, am I going to help people too? If you want to, my love, but first you need to grow up being a good and just person. Like you and Daddy. Marina smiled, kissing her son's forehead. Better than me and Daddy. That night, after the children slept, Marina and Robert sat in the living room. To talk about the future. The Institute was growing rapidly, and they needed to make important decisions about expansion. Marina, Robert said, I have a proposal for you. What kind of proposal? How about we turn this into a real national movement? Not just the Institute, but a network of support for women entrepreneurs throughout the country. How so? Partnerships with universities, government funding, social franchises of the Institute in every state. I'm talking about transforming what we do into public policy. Marina remained silent, processing the magnitude of the proposal. It would be a lot of work, she said finally. It would be. But it would also be the chance to multiply by 1,000 the impact we already have. And the children? Our family? The children would grow up seeing their parents fighting for a better world. I can't think of a greater example than that. Marina got up and walked to the window, looking at the quiet street where they lived. It was a good, simple, happy life, but there were thousands of Marinas scattered throughout the United States, waiting for an opportunity. Would you give up the presidency of Johnson & Sons to dedicate yourself to this? I would. The company is established, has a competent board, but what we do together, this can change the country. Marina turned to look at him. Remember when we met? You said you wanted to give me the chance to be who I really was. I remember. And what if who I really am is someone who needs to do this, someone who can't stay quiet knowing she can help more people? Robert smiled. Then I think we're going to need a better babysitter for the children. They laughed together, and Marina knew they had found the next chapter of their lives. 6 months later, the Grace National Movement was officially born, a network of support for women entrepreneurs that worked in partnership with governments, universities, and private companies. Marina became the national director. Robert the executive director, and Julia the pedagogical coordinator. In the first year, they served 5,000 women in 15 states. In the second year, 10,000 women in all American states. Marina's story became a case study in universities, an example in government programs, inspiration for thousands of women. But what made her most proud weren't the numbers or recognition. It was when she received letters from women like Amanda, telling that they had managed to open their own businesses, support their families, fulfill their dreams. One December afternoon, 7 years after that first meeting in the factory warehouse, Marina was organizing Christmas presents under the tree when she found a letter that Gracie had written to Santa Claus. "Dear Santa Claus," said the letter in a child's handwriting, "I don't want toys this year. I want Mommy to keep helping sad women become happy, and I want that when I grow up, I'll be just like her. Signed, Gracie Montenegro Johnson." Marina felt her eyes water. She carefully kept the letter. It would be a treasure forever. That night, at Christmas dinner, gathered around the simple but abundant table, Marina looked at her family. Robert, now with some grey hair but the same passionate smile. Gracie, talkative and curious. Peter, sweet and affectionate. Carmen, who had become a grandmother of the heart. Julia, who had brought her boyfriend for the first time. Amanda, who had graduated from the institute and now worked as a designer for a national brand. "Before we eat," Marina said, "I want to make a toast." Everyone raised their glasses, juice for the children, wine for the adults. 10 years ago, I thought my life had ended. Today, I realize it was just waiting for the right moment to really begin. I toast to the family we built, to the dreams we fulfilled, and mainly to the people we're still going to help. "Cheers," everyone said in unison. After dinner, Marina went out to the porch to breathe the fresh night air. Robert followed her, as he always did. "Do you know what I'm thinking?" she said. "What?" "That my mother would be proud, not just of me, but of everything we built, of what you became, of the children we're raising, of the lives we're touching. I'm sure she would be." "Robert?" "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me in that warehouse, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, for loving me not to save me, but to help me save myself." Robert kissed her softly. "Thank you for letting me be part of your story." "Our story," she corrected, "always our story." They remained embraced on the porch, watching the stars over Coral Gables. Inside, the children played. Carmen and Julia washed dishes while talking about life. Amanda drew on a new drawing board she had received as a gift. It was a simple, everyday scene, but full of love, purpose, and hope. Marina Johnson Montenegro had started as a young seamstress who thought her life would always be a torn fabric. But she had learned that with patience, dedication, and lots of love, any fabric can be transformed into a work of art. And so, stitch by stitch, she had sewn not just a new life for herself, but a network of hope that extended throughout the country, touching thousands of lives and proving that true love for oneself, for family, for humanity, is the most powerful force of transformation that exists. Her mother's sewing machine, which now decorated a special corner of the living room, no longer made noise, but its legacy echoed in every transformed life, in every dream fulfilled, in every woman who discovered she deserved to be seen, loved, and respected. And on that Christmas night, under the stars of Coral Gables, Marina fell asleep, knowing she had honored in the best possible way Grace Johnson's memory, transforming pain into hope, injustice into fight, and love into action. 3 years later, 10 years since the first meeting, the University of Miami auditorium was packed. Marina, now 31 years old, took the stage to deliver one of the most important lectures of her career. She had been invited to speak at the International Seminar on Social Entrepreneurship, where she would share the stage with world personalities who dedicated their lives to social transformation. "Good afternoon," she began, her firm voice echoing through the auditorium. "My name is Marina Johnson Montenegro, and 10 years ago I was a 20-year-old seamstress who thought my destiny was to spend my whole life sewing dreams that would never be mine." In the front rows, Robert watched with pride. At 43 years old, he had become a national reference in corporate social responsibility. Beside him, Gracie, now 8 years old, paid attention to her mother's words with a seriousness that was impressive for her age. Peter, at 5 years old, drew in a little notebook, but occasionally looked at the stage where his mother spoke. Today, the Grace National Movement serves more than 50,000 women. And per year in all American states, Marina continued. But what I want to tell you aren't the numbers. I want to tell you about human transformation. She clicked the control, and Amanda's photo appeared on the screen, who now had her own clothing brand in Houston and employed 15 women in vulnerable situations. This is Amanda Silva. When I met her 3 years ago, she was exactly where I had been one day, lost, hurt, but with a dream hidden in her heart. Today, she not only fulfilled her own dream, but is helping other women fulfill theirs. The audience applauded, but Marina raised her hand asking for silence. But Amanda isn't an exception. She's the rule, because we discovered something very important. When you offer a woman not just financial help, but mainly the recognition that she has value, she doesn't just transform her own life, she transforms generations. Marina clicked again, and an impressive graph appeared. Our studies show that 73% of women served by the movement achieve financial sustainability within 2 years. More importantly, 89% of their children stay in school, compared to 45% before intervention. We're breaking cycles of poverty that had been perpetuating for generations. In the audience, there were representatives from international organizations, business people, academics, and even politicians. Everyone paid full attention to Marina's words. You must be wondering, what's the secret? How did a former seamstress and a businessman manage to create something like this? Marina paused, her gaze meeting Robert's. The secret is simple. We treat every woman as if she were our sister, our daughter, our mother. Not as a number, not as a social case, but as a person with dreams, fears, potential, and the right to dignity. She then told about the methodology they had developed: psychological support, technical training, microcredit, continued mentoring, and mainly creating support networks among the women themselves. Today, I want to announce something special, Marina said, reaching the end of her presentation. Thanks to a partnership with the World Bank, we're going to expand the movement to other Latin American countries. In 2025, women in Mexico, Colombia, and Ecuador will also have access to what we developed here. The audience stood up in emotional applause. Marina came down from the stage and was embraced by Robert and the children. "Mommy was incredible," said Gracie. "She always is," replied Peter, who was beginning to better understand his parents' work. After the lecture, there was a cocktail where Marina was approached by dozens of people interested in learning more about the movement. But the conversation that marked her most was with a young Argentinian journalist. "Señora Marina," the young woman said in Spanish, "my mother watched your television interview last year. She was going through a very difficult situation, similar to what you experienced. She decided to seek help, got a loan to open a small business, and today supports our family with dignity. I wanted to thank you personally. Marina felt her eyes water. This is what motivated her every day, knowing that her story was inspiring women beyond Brazil's borders. That night, back in Coral Gables, the family gathered in the living room to talk about the day. It was a tradition they had created. Whenever something important happened, they sat together to share feelings and reflections. "Mom," said Gracie, "when I grow up, I want to do work like yours." "And what kind of work do you want to do?" Marina asked. "I want to help children who don't have families. I want them to know they're important." Marina and Robert looked at each other, moved. Gracie had inherited not just her parents' beauty, but mainly their values. "And you, Peter, what do you want to do when you grow up?" Peter, always shyer, thought a bit before answering. "I want to be a doctor, but a doctor who takes care of poor people for free." "Why?" "Because Grandpa Edward died sick, and Aunt Julia said that if he had had money to treat himself better, maybe he would have lived longer." The innocence and wisdom of the child deeply touched Marina. Peter had only met Edward once, but had understood something fundamental about social justice. "You know what?" Marina said, hugging both children. "It doesn't matter what profession you choose. What's important is that you always remember to use your talents to do good." "Like you do?" asked Gracie. "Like we try to do," Robert corrected gently. "Every day we try to be better people than we were yesterday." A few weeks later, Marina received an unexpected call. It was from Dr. Eduardo Martinez, rector of Florida International University. "Professor Marina," he said. She had received the title of honorary professor for her contributions to social entrepreneurship research. "I'd like to propose something unusual." "I'm listening." "How about we create the first undergraduate course in the United States in women's social entrepreneurship, with your methodology as the curricula base?" Marina was silent for a few seconds, processing the magnitude of the proposal. "Dr. Eduardo, that would be incredible. But I don't have traditional academic training for something like this. Marina, you have something much more valuable, real experience and proven results. We would have PhD professors for theoretical disciplines, but you would be the general coordinator, bringing practical experience. I need to talk to my husband and think, of course, but know that it would be a world first. Universities in the United States and Europe have already shown interest in partnerships." That night, Marina talked with Robert about the proposal. It was tempting, but also scary. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think it would be the natural evolution of what you've been doing, training people specialized in replicating your methodology. But what about the movement and the women we serve? The movement already has a solid structure. Julia and the team can handle the day-to-day. You would be more strategic, training multipliers." Marina reflected for several days. She talked with Julia, who encouraged her completely, saying she was ready to take on more responsibilities. She talked with Amanda and other women who had been served by the movement, and all were unanimous. It was an opportunity to multiply the impact. 3 months later, Marina was in her new office at FIU, preparing the curriculum for the first Women's Social Entrepreneurship course in the United States. It would be a 4-year course, with disciplines ranging from social psychology to financial management, including professional training techniques and public policies. But what excited her most was the discipline she would teach herself: personal transformation as the foundation for social transformation. "The first class will be small," explained Dr. Eduardo during a planning meeting. "Only 30 students selected by criteria that include potential for social impact." "And what about socio-economic criteria?" Marina asked. "Half the spots will be reserved for low-income students with full scholarships." Marina smiled. It was exactly as it should be. On the first day of class, Marina looked at the 30 faces before her, young women and some men, from different origins, ages and experiences, but all united by the desire to make a difference. "Welcome to the Women's Social Entrepreneurship course," she began. "Before we talk about techniques, methodologies and theories, I want you to understand one thing. You're not here to learn how to save people. You're here to learn how to help people save themselves." A student in the front row raised her hand. "Professor, what's the difference?" "The difference is that when you save someone, that person becomes dependent on you. When you help someone save themselves, they become capable of helping other people save themselves too." Marina wrote on the board, "Autonomy, not dependence." This will be our first lesson and perhaps the most important of the entire course. Over the following months, Marina fell in love with teaching. She discovered she had a natural talent for teaching, for inspiring, for awakening in students the same fire that burned in her heart. Her students didn't just study theories. They created real projects, implemented community initiatives, measured results. It was a practical pedagogy that revolutionized how social entrepreneurship was taught in the United States. A year later, the first class was about to graduate, and Marina prepared a special surprise for the graduation ceremony. She had invited all the women who had been served by the Grace National movement in the Miami region. On graduation day, the auditorium was full. Besides the graduates' families, there were hundreds of women who represented the real impact of the work those young people were about to continue. "Dear graduates," Marina said in her speech, "you're not just graduating in a profession. You're becoming agents of transformation. Each of the women here present represents the possibility of change you carry in your hands." She pointed to the audience, where Amanda was sitting with her employees, where Julia was with a group of regional coordinators, where dozens of other women represented stories of overcoming. "Look at them. They are what you can achieve, not numbers in reports, but real lives." That were transformed because someone believed in their potential. After the ceremony, there was a celebration where graduates and movement beneficiaries could talk. Marina watched the interactions with joy. It was the materialization of her dream of creating a truly integrated network of social transformation. Gracie, now 9 years old, circulated through the party greeting people like a little hostess. Peter, at 6 years old, had made friends with some children who were daughters of beneficiaries and played animatedly. "They're growing up in this environment," Robert commented, approaching Marina. "They're learning from a young age that doing good is natural." "It's the greatest gift we can give them," Marina replied. "The awareness that we can always make a difference." That night at home, Marina was organizing some documents in her office when she found a letter she had forgotten to open. It was from an American university. "Dear Ms. Montenegro," the letter began in English. It was an invitation to be a visiting professor at Harvard to help create a program similar to what she had developed in Florida. Marina called Robert, who read the letter with growing admiration. "Marina, this is Harvard, one of the most prestigious universities in the world." "I know, but I don't know if I can accept." "Why?" "Because it would mean being away for a year, away from you, the children, the work here." Robert hugged her. "Marina, remember when we met and I said I wanted you to have the chance to be who you really were? I remember. Maybe who you really are is someone who needs to take this message to the entire world." Marina looked into his eyes. "And you? Would you be up for a year in Boston?" "I'd be up for a year anywhere, as long as it was with you and the children. Even knowing it would be difficult, different language, different culture." "Marina, you transformed the lives of tens of thousands of women in the United States. If Harvard is calling, it's because they recognize you have something unique to offer the world. How could I not support that?" 6 months later, the Montenegro family was at Miami International Airport, bound for Boston. Gracie and Peter were excited about the adventure. Carmen cried with anticipated longing, and Julia promised to take care of everything in the United States. "Call often," said Julia, hugging Marina. "And remember, you're not just representing yourselves out there. You're representing all of us." In Boston, Marina was received as an academic celebrity. Her first seminar at Harvard Business School filled the auditorium, with graduate students from dozens of countries coming to hear her speak. "Good afternoon," she began in English, still with a slight accent, but with the confidence of someone who knew she had something valuable to share. 10 years ago, I was a seamstress who thought my life would always be about sewing other people's dreams. Today, I'm here to talk about how to transform personal pain into collective healing. During the year at Harvard, Marina didn't just teach, she learned. She had contact with methodologies from other countries, met similar experiences in different cultures, and mainly proved to herself that her message was universal. Robert took advantage of the period to do an executive MBA. The children quickly adapted to the American school, and the family lived an experience that further expanded their horizons. But what marked Marina most were the letters she received from the United States, women who wrote telling about their achievements, former students who were creating their own social projects, community leaders who had been inspired by her story. One letter in particular moved her deeply. It was from an 18-year-old girl from a small town in rural Alabama. "Professor Marina, my name is Grace. I chose this name in your honor since my baptismal name was different. I was born into a very poor family, went through difficult situations, but I saw your television interview and decided I wanted to change my life. I studied hard, passed the college entrance exam for social work, and today I coordinate a project supporting women victims of domestic violence in my town. We've already helped 200 women in 2 years. I wanted you to know that you changed my life without even knowing me. And now I'm changing other people's lives. Thank you for teaching me it's possible." Marina cried, reading the letter. It was the most concrete proof that her work had created waves that spread far beyond what she could imagine. At the end of the year at Harvard, Marina was invited for one last lecture, this time in the university's main auditorium, for the entire academic community. "When I came here," she said in her English that had improved significantly, "I thought I was coming to teach. But I realized I came here to learn something very important, that the capacity for transformation is universal. It doesn't matter if you're in Miami, Boston, Mumbai, or Lagos. When you treat people with dignity and give them tools to grow, magic happens." In the audience, Robert and the children watched with pride. Gracie whispered to her father, "One day I want to speak like that too." "You will," Robert replied. "You'll do even greater things than Mommy." At the end of the lecture, Harvard's rector made a surprising announcement. The university was creating the Marina Montenegro Fellowship, an annual scholarship for students from developing countries who wanted to study social entrepreneurship. "This fellowship," explained the rector, "will ensure that Marina's legacy continues here at Harvard, bringing new voices and perspectives to our community." Marina was too moved to speak. It was an honor she had never imagined receiving. Back in the United States, the family was received as heroes. The year at Harvard had further amplified the international recognition of the Grace National movement and invitations arrived from various countries, but Marina knew where her heart was. During the absence, she had felt deep longing for the smell of Miami, for the American accent, for conversations in English that was her heart's language. "We'll never stay away for so long again," she said to Robert on the first night back. "I agree, but was it worth it?" "It was, because now I know that what we do here can really impact the entire world." 2 years after this return, Marina was in her office at FIU when she received a call that would change her life again. "Marina Johnson Montenegro?" asked a female voice in English. "Yes, speaking." "This is Sarah Johnson from the Nobel Committee. I'm calling to inform you that you have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize." Marina needed to sit down. She thought she had heard wrong. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "You've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of your work in social transformation and women's empowerment." When she hung, up the phone, Marina remained silent for several minutes. Being nominated for the Nobel was something she had never imagined. Even if she didn't win, it was an incredible recognition. She immediately called Robert, who screamed with joy upon receiving the news. Then she called Julia, Amanda, Carmen, Gracie, and Peter at school. The news spread quickly through American media. Marina became magazine covers, was interviewed on all major TV shows, and received congratulations from world personalities. But what touched her most were the messages from women who had been served by the movement. Thousands of letters, emails, social media messages, all with the same tone. "You deserve it, Professor. Thank you for changing our lives." The Nobel ceremony would be in December, in Oslo. Even if she didn't win, Marina would be one of 5 nominees to speak about her work. The night before the trip to Norway, Marina was on the house porch, looking at the stars, when Gracie approached. "Mom, can I ask a question?" "Of course, my love." "If you win the Nobel, will anything change?" Marina hugged her daughter, now 11 years old and increasingly thoughtful. "Why do you ask that?" "Because I'm afraid you'll become too famous and won't have time for me and Peter anymore." Marina felt her heart tighten. "Gracie, look at me." The girl raised her little blue eyes identical to her mother's. "No matter how many awards I win, how many people I meet, or how many countries I visit, you and Peter will always be what matters most in my life. You and Daddy are my greatest achievement. Promise? I promise. And do you know why? Because everything I do is to leave a better world for you." In Oslo, Marina was more nervous than ever. The auditorium was full of diplomats, world leaders, intellectuals. In the audience, Robert, Gracie, and Peter watched her with pride. When they announced the winners of that year's Nobel Peace Prize, Marina heard her name being called. She had won. She went up to the stage in shock, with tears in her eyes. The prize would be shared with two other activists from different continents, recognizing the global work of women's empowerment. In her speech, Marina spoke about Grace, about Edward, about all the women who had transformed their lives through the movement, but mainly she spoke about hope. "This award isn't mine," she said, her voice echoing through the auditorium. "It belongs to all women who had the courage to start over. It belongs to mothers who chose to fight instead of giving up. It belongs to daughters who decided to break cycles of poverty and violence, because I learned that true peace doesn't come just from the absence of conflicts, but from the presence of opportunities." The ovation lasted more than 5 minutes. In the front rows, Gracie and Peter applauded emotionally without completely understanding the magnitude of the moment, but knowing it was something very special. That night, at the hotel in Oslo, Marina looked at the Nobel trophy and thought of her mother. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. "We managed to transform our pain into the strength of thousands of women." Back in the United States, Marina was received as a national hero. But what moved her most was the reception at Miami International Airport. Hundreds of women who had been served by the movement were there, singing a song they had created especially for her. Among them was Amanda, now a successful businesswoman who employed more than 50 people. There was Julia, who had married and was pregnant with her first child. There were dozens of other women who represented transformation stories. "Professor," one of them shouted, "the Nobel is ours too." Marina smiled, knowing it was true. That award represented every tear dried, every dream fulfilled, every life transformed. And so, Marina Johnson Montenegro, the seamstress who once thought her life would always be a torn fabric, became a global symbol of hope and transformation. Proving that with love, determination, and careful sewing, any life can be transformed into a masterpiece. But most importantly, she knew her story was just beginning because she had planted seeds that would continue germinating for generations. And so ends the complete journey of Marina and Robert, a story that began with pain and transformed into a national network of hope. 7 years later, we see how true love not only transforms 2 lives, but multiplies to touch thousands of people. How? Did you feel following this transformation to the end? Leave in the comments from which city you're watching and tell us. Do you believe that small actions can generate big changes? What story of overcoming would you like to see next time? If the story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional narratives. And don't forget, every woman deserves to be seen, respected, and have the chance to fulfill her dreams. Share this message. Until the next story, and Remember, sometimes the most beautiful life is born exactly from the most difficult moments.